The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The big news is that John Boehner, Speaker of the House, Republican-controlled House, of course, has agreed to a temporary debt ceiling increase in exchange for negotiations to reopen the government and end the government shutdown. We're going to be following if and when that happens. And we've continued to see the repetition ad nauseum of these talking points that are just not based in reality. We've had for days now, we've known that the votes were there to reopen the government. Of course, John Boehner not calling a simple, clean vote on this. And we keep hearing, Lewis, that President Obama won't meet with us from the Republicans. We're so sad. He's ignoring us. He's throwing us to the curb. He just won't talk to us, like kids on the playground saying that other boy won't speak to me. And it turns out it's just not true. President Obama has again invited all House Republicans to a White House meeting. Almost all of them declined. The president is starting his meetings today, meeting with the full House Democratic caucus. But when he invited House Republicans, they couldn't bring themselves to accept his offer without twisting themselves into a knot. Boehner's office said yesterday that the Republican leader would send a small group to Obama's meeting Thursday, but not the full invited caucus. Boehner spokesman Brendan Buck said the meeting would only be worthwhile if it was focused on finding a solution. So Buck said that only the elected leadership and certain committee chairmen would attend. How would it be possible to find a solution if you don't even send the full group? Everything that is being done, Lewis, I know this might sound crazy, but it's almost like the Republicans don't want to just get this thing resolved quickly.
Well, why would they? They're the ones who put it in place. And the blame game continues and the obstructionism continues.
As Jed Lewison said on Daily Kos, if you're like most people, you're probably shaking your head at the fact that Boehner rejects a full conference meeting just one day after claiming that the Republican Party only shut down the government in the first place because President Obama wouldn't talk to them. And as I've said on this program before, over the last 6 or 7 months, President Obama requested 18 different meetings with Republicans in order to try to figure this out. And we just watch out when you're reading whatever corporate newspaper you look at or watching corporate news or whatever the case may be. Just remember that the framing is completely wrong. The votes have existed to end this for days. The opportunities to prevent this were numerous for months. And the Republicans who are claiming Obama won't meet with them are just not showing up to the meetings that they're invited to. It's a complete and utter farce. And we can disagree over the specific seriousness of this versus going into a war that didn't make sense versus any other particular thing. But what is clear is that the level at which Congress is operating in terms of like, are they at a 12th grade level? Are they at a kindergarten level? It's very, very low with this particular debacle.
Not just the maturity level. It's also the complete disregard for those affected by the shutdown. I mean, it seems like the vast majority of our politicians, or at least of our Republicans, just don't really care that this is hurting the country.
Total disregard, absolutely. There's a movie coming out where actor Benedict Cumberbatch plays Julian Assange. And the movie is about WikiLeaks, and I'm on the press list for WikiLeaks. It's every once in a while they'll send stuff out, and I got a great press release yesterday with a letter that Julian Assange wrote to Benedict Cumberbatch, which I have here. If you're not following this, DreamWorks has put together a movie, and now there's a trailer out for a movie called The Fifth Estate, which is going to air on televisions nationwide. And Julian Assange has released a letter to actor Benedict Cumberbatch, who emailed Assange right before principal photography started, which was at the beginning of the year. And Benedict Cumberbatch wanted to meet in person with Julian Assange. That's something that often happens in when there is a movie made about a real life person. Oftentimes the actor will meet with that person because they learn about them, they learn their mannerisms, they get to know them. Makes perfect sense. And Julian Assange declined to do this, and now WikiLeaks has rejected the letter, and I'll read some of it to you. I encourage you to read the whole thing, Lewis. It's compelling stuff. And Julian Assange basically says, listen, I've looked at the script for this movie, and it's filled with nonsense, and I just can't really imagine meeting with you. And the letter is compelling. I'll read a little bit of it. He thanks Benedict for contacting him, and he says, I think I would enjoy meeting you. The bond that develops between an actor and a living subject is significant. If the film reaches distribution, we will be forever correlated in the public imagination. Our paths will be forever intertwined. But I must speak directly. I hope you'll take such directness as a mark of respect, not as a mark of unkindness. I believe you're a good person, but I do not believe that this film is a good film. I do not believe it is going to be positive for me or the people I care about. I believe it is going to be overwhelmingly negative for me and the people I care about. It is based on a deceitful book by someone who has a vendetta against me and my organization. In other circumstances, this vendetta may have gone away, but our conflict with the United States government and the establishment press has created a patronage and commissioning market, powerful if unpopular, for works and comments that are harmful to us. I know the film intends to depict me and my work in a negative light. Lewis, what do you think about this? Would you do the same thing if the script was written and you knew there was no way you were going to be able to change the direction of the film, given the fact that the book it's based on is critical of you? Would you also decline to meet with the man who is playing you?
I would definitely, if I knew that the film, like you said, was not accurate or tried to paint me in a bad light, or I just didn't agree with it overall. Yeah, I would distance myself from it, and I would make that known to the public.
I'm interested in seeing this. While I understand that it is in fact based on a book which is critical of Julian Assange. Some of the inaccuracies that WikiLeaks says are in the movie. For example, the Fifth Estate falsely implies that WikiLeaks harmed 2,000 government informants. Not even the U.S. government is alleging that WikiLeaks harmed a single person. Most of the events depicted never even happened, or the people shown were not even involved in them. It has real names and real places, and it looks like it's covering real events, but it is still a dramatic and cinematic work. So there's kind of two sides on this, because it is not uncommon, Lewis, when there is a Hollywood movie made of real life events, that they do take creative liberties, right? At the same time, the counter argument is WikiLeaks and those leaks and Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, the entire story has been wrought with corruption and the worst of the American mainstream, so-called mainstream establishment, that it is actually really damaging if the only interaction that many Americans and people around the world have with WikiLeaks and the story of what happened is a movie based on an incredibly biased book.
Right, that's definitely something to consider. And we could also talk about shoddy media coverage of the whole thing.
We could.
And it's unfortunate. And we know that in the vast majority of cases like this, Hollywood does completely exaggerate and add things to these movies.
The question I pose to our viewers is, will the net effect of this be positive in that more people being aware of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange in the absence of the specific biases of the movie will be good? Or will the movie actually do more harm? Will it do net harm in the sense that it will give people a negative impression of WikiLeaks that may not be connected to reality? I'm curious to hear the thoughts of our audience. There has been an arrest of a McDonald's worker after telling the company president that she can't even afford shoes on her McDonald's. I'm sorry, I almost said Walmart there, which would have been a similar but different story. McDonald's employee. This is written up in Raw Story. There's a woman who's been employed by McDonald's for many, many years, specifically 10 years. She was arrested a few days ago after she confronted the company president at a meeting and said, I can't even afford to buy shoes or food for my children. This is Nancy Salgado, 26 years old. She spoke to The Real News. She said she felt like she just had to say something during the McDonald's President Jeff Stratton's speech at the Union League Club of Chicago. She shouted, it's really hard for me to feed my two kids and struggle day to day. Do you think that this is fair, that I have to be making $8.25 an hour when I've worked for McDonald's for 10 years? And Stratton replied from the podium, I've been there for 40 years. She went on, the thing is, I need a raise, but you're not helping your employees. How is this possible? At this point, someone approached Salgado and said, "You're about to be arrested." And she is still working at McDonald's, even though she was arrested. She says her hours had been cut and that she fears there is going to be further retaliation. This is one of those things where people will say, she doesn't have to work there. It's not McDonald's responsibility to just pay her more. It's her responsibility to find a better job. It's not the responsibility of the government to raise the minimum wage. Aside from that specific discussion, which we've really looked at, we need to be having serious conversations about the minimum wage, of course, but also about the cost of living, Lewis, which has just swelled dramatically in so many parts of this country, including here in New York City. And cost of living also, I think, needs to be addressed. And that's often not discussed. There's just these conversations in a vacuum about the minimum wage specifically.
Yeah. And with regard to this woman, I mean, I hope that for 10 years she's been actively looking for other jobs. I mean, sure, she could be in one of those areas where that's really not an option. But for 10 years, I don't know. I think in the course of 10 years, you could probably do a little bit better. And is it up to McDonald's franchise owners to, can they change their wages, or is that mandated by corporate?
Well, there are some corporate-owned McDonald's and there are some franchise McDonald's, and there are, of course, the corporate ones. They are directed with leeway, of course, from corporate headquarters. They're also mandated by state minimum wages. So there's a number of different factors, but I still say to people, not even specifically because of this story, but in part because of the next one, resist the urge to go to McDonald's. It's been like 13 or 14 years that I'm totally clean off of McDonald's and similar places. The food's not healthy. They don't pay well. And even if it's not their responsibility to be doubling everyone's wages, even if you don't believe that, they still don't pay well. Just don't go. Find a local business. I mean, here in New York, you can get if you really want a burger, fries, and a soda, you can get it for $5 anywhere. If you want sandwiches, there's sandwich shops all over the place. It's not impossible in much of this country to find alternatives that are inexpensive and you can support a local business. And I understand parts of this country have food deserts where places like McDonald's are almost the only option.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't understand why anyone would knowingly put that type of food into their bodies. But like you said, money can be an issue and food deserts are always an issue.
A team of scientists broke down exactly what goes into chicken nuggets, and it turns out that only about 40 to 50% of a chicken nugget is actual meat. The rest is not meat. Mother Jones has a write-up about this study that was done where researchers from the University of Mississippi went into two different fast food chains. They didn't say which, but we have to assume at least one of them was either a Burger King, a Wendy's, or a McDonald's. They ordered chicken nuggets and they broke them down, okay? At one of the places, this is amazing, the chicken nugget was only 40% meat or muscle. The rest was generous quantities of fat, other tissues, including connective tissue and bone tissue. Gotta love that chicken bone tissue, Lewis. Gotta love that. The other sample that they tested had about 50% meat. The remainder was primarily fat with some blood vessels and nerves present, as well as epithelium, the stuff glands are made of. I was shocked. The way I usually like epithelium is sprinkled with paprika and roasted over an open flame. I would never expect to find it in chicken nuggets. It's not factually unhealthy to eat these things, but the idea that more than half your chicken nuggets are not chicken meat is definitely disturbing.
Well, this study also just seems to cover what the meat itself is made up, what the meat of the product, what most of the product is.
Right. We've got to consider the breading and all of the additives too.
Oh, of course, the chemicals and all the flavorings and all that nasty stuff. I'm sure the list would be huge if we added those.
They also tested for people thinking, hey, I get my chicken in the freezer at the supermarket. Some of that frozen Tyson chicken is also not that much better. A ton of the calories are coming from just fat that's mixed in because it is mechanically separated and recombined chicken, which is just delightful to look at pictures of. We've just got to get people off of processed foods. I mean, that's the thing. They're often subsidized, especially when they involve corn products. They are cheap. The dollars per calorie are very low, but we just have to get people off of this stuff.
Definitely. And unfortunately, even most of the time when you're eating not processed chicken, you're still eating chicken that has been given feed that is made up of mostly corn, which might have been covered in pesticides or
Yep.
hormones added, you name it.
Let's take a break. On the bonus show today, we've gotten, since Lewis told his pyramid scheme, multi-level marketing story, how he was approached by a multi-level marketer, we've gotten tons of stories from our members about other pyramid schemes that they're aware of. So we're going to talk about those and a lot more stuff. Join us on the bonus show. It is great fun. It is basically, the stories are chosen by our members. davidpakman.com/membership. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Do you know why patriots eat turkey on Thanksgiving, Lewis? Is it because turkeys are evil, socialist, liberal birds that need to be systematically eliminated? Find out at liberalbias.com. And I hope that our member of the day, Robert Hobbs, already knows all about liberal bias. I'm sure that's why he is a David Pakman Show member. Robert, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You're doing a great thing supporting the show, which all of our viewers and listeners should be doing. All right, I've got a couple of Pat Robertson clips for you, and I also have one of our first Elizabeth Hasselbeck clips since she left The View and joined Fox News. So let's save that. Let's save that for last, Lewis, and I'll run through a couple of Pat Robertson clips. Pat Robertson was asked about, he's spoken in the past about how it's not really a bad idea to pray over your clothes and even certain rings and jewelry because they could have demons attached. Someone wrote in about that to ask about how can she possibly pray over all these things that her kids have in the house, and this was Pat Robertson's answer to her.
All right, Sherry writes, I have a question on cursed or familiar objects. Your objects. I've heard of people who say get rid of any occult-like objects in your home, books, CDs, movies, clothes, etc. However, I am married with 5 children. It is hard for me to keep track of all the things going in and out of this home 24/7. And when I do hear music they shouldn't listen to, I make them turn it off. I cover my home and family in prayer every day and night. Shouldn't that cover it, or do I need to do a walkthrough and throw things away?
I think you can get overly hung up on all these things. I really do. I think you're doing the right thing. You're teaching your children about the Lord. You are asking God for his covering and protection. I think that what is important is, were these objects actually used in some kind of satanic ritual or some occult practice? And if that's the case, then there might be some demonic force that attaches to that which was used in pagan worship. But in terms of going around and say this is cursed and that cursed, you drive yourself crazy doing that. I mean, don't even think about it.
I heard a great, Derek Prince, he's a great Bible teacher, and he had some beautiful paintings in his home that he'd gotten somewhere, I think in China, and the Lord spoke to him that he had to get rid of them because they had something attached to them. So it can happen. You just have to be discerning.
I've heard of people that have headaches. They get something from overseas and they look so beautiful, and yet it's actually a deity, and a demonic force has attached itself to that. But
the Lord will speak to you if there's something.
Yeah, there's a very specific item. I know for a fact that slap chop that's advertised on infomercials, that actually does have demons attached to it, Lewis. But even still, how can you possibly write in and take the advice from Pat Robertson when it's contradictory? First, he said you should be praying over stuff. Now he's saying, it's not going to do worse than cause you some headaches. I almost get the sense that Pat Robertson's making up all of this garbage as he goes along.
Yeah, I've suspected that for a while, and I get a headache when I think about all the people who are listening to every word he says and then calling in with questions like this. It really hurts my head a lot.
Then Pat Robertson was also commenting about transgender, and first of all, he makes it abundantly clear he doesn't even know what transgender is. Then he makes some really off-color comments and then says, what the hell, I'll just compare transgender to being a horse. That's the comparison I'll make. Check this out.
They don't care about the reading and writing. They're into gender politics. I may be an old fuddy-duddy. What is transgender?
Well, they're still boys, but they dress like girls, or they're still girls, but they dress like boys. They still have all the boy parts and all the girl parts, which I think makes it very uncomfortable for those who are actually, girls and boys.
I am not opposed to somebody who feels that they're a boy trapped in a girl's body and they want a sex change operation. I think that happens, and I see nothing wrong with it. But this whole business about transgenders, you say they got boy parts, but they want to go to the girl's restroom. I mean, that's absurd.
Now, some of them...
but it's insane. I just cannot believe that the normal people in America, the people who want to just live their lives, can't be allowed to do it without having this stuff imposed on them constantly. Whew. Now, we talk about transgender. I have a former stallion who is now a gelding, because stallions get very aggressive, but he wasn't trying to be a girl. We just made him into a less aggressive male. And I want you to see him. He's big and beautiful.
So let's go through this a piece at a time, Lewis. First of all, when he talks about how people just want to live their lives without others imposing stuff on them, isn't that exactly what people like Pat Robertson and the religious rightists are doing to LGBT people who just want to live their lives in peace without legislation designed to discriminate against them, without people like Pat Robertson raising money on the backs of being mean to them and denying them basic rights? So often, the religious rightists who make these anti-whatever arguments, anti-choice, anti-gay, anything other than what's completely considered the kind of normative status quo, they're actually projecting what they claim is being done to them. It's what they're doing to others.
It's what they've been doing for thousands of years. I mean, let's talk about proselytizing, and that's still going on. I mean, I cannot think of a bigger imposition.
Yeah, and then again, when he compares being transgender, and that makes him think of a stallion who was gelded, I don't know how a gelding is really representative at all of anything going on in the LGBT community.
I think someone needs to just bring a bunch of very acute descriptions to Pat Robertson on all of these things that he's confused about.
So Elizabeth Hasselbeck she has left The View, as we've talked about, and she is now on Fox News, probably the correct place for her, perfectly logical. And she teased a segment. This guy, John Stossel, goes on Fox News, and they kind of pitch him as the non-political guy who just gives you the bottom line truth on what you need to know so you don't get screwed. The reality is he's an incredibly ideological, extreme libertarian who falls under not true libertarian philosophy, but kind of this libertine libertarian that Judah Fried talked about yesterday on the show. If you missed that, check it out. Listen to what she had to say about the ugly side of welfare. Check it out.
Up next, a Fox Business Alert. Brand new joblessness numbers about to be released. What are they? An instant analysis next. Then, do these folks really need to be on welfare?
I have a TV.
Yeah, I have a television.
You have air conditioning?
Yes.
Cable TV?
Yeah.
How many channels?
101.
John Stossel checking into that and exposing the ugly side of entitlements. Coming up.
Okay, now to me, Lewis, the ugly side of welfare is the negative connotation surrounding those who receive government benefits, the idea that the spending is wasteful, all of the negative nonsense around welfare programs. That to me is the ugly side of welfare. The fact that some poor people have cell phones and air conditioning, to me, is not at all the ugly side of welfare.
Right. They passed this off as hard-hitting, interesting journalism. And I think if you think about this logically, we kind of need those people who are on welfare to have cell phones, don't we? It's
Yeah,
kind
I mean,
of
look,
an integral part of their lives.
Cell phones for people who are on welfare are hugely important. Often they have addresses that might change much faster than people who earn more money, to put it simply. It becomes very difficult to apply for jobs or even to maintain access to some of these benefits if you don't have a number where people can reach you. You may not have an email address. You may not have a regular physical address. That you really need a cell phone. It's abundantly clear. And I would even go further. The assumption that poor people shouldn't have cell phones is in part kind of grounded in the idea that it's an unnecessary expense and or a luxury, but increasingly access to a mobile phone is becoming more of a utility. The idea that it is simply a luxury to have a phone that is yours, that goes to you, that you carry around as a luxury, I think is antiquated, and it's drastically distorting this. And then the other thing, as far as the air conditioning goes, Lewis, you can get an air conditioner for $100 or even less sometimes. Who are we to say that if you are on welfare, providing yourself, or maybe someone who is elderly who lives with you, or maybe a very young child or baby who are very susceptible to those high temperature, high humidity days, with some comfort in the summer, is somehow out of bounds? I mean, it's almost like we're in a country where the right expects poor people to live in cardboard lean-tos with no plumbing and dirt floors.
Right, I know, and maybe that would make it seem like they're not taking as much from the government as people think they are. I mean, the ugliness does go both ways. Of course, there are people taking advantage of the system.
Right, and as we know, Lewis, every time we say that, we can acknowledge it, and we have to say, any system will have that, and is it statistically significant? And the answer is no.
Yeah, and let's remember that a lot of these government handouts, as they're put in this segment, are actually quite stimulative.
Oh, no question about it. We've talked. I can't even. My head's going to explode if I start going down and doing that analysis again, Lewis. Suffice it to say, we're completely at home here with what Elizabeth Hasselbeck is delivering in her new role at Fox News. Let's take a break. We're going to talk to David Greenfield about technology addiction next, and then your voicemails and more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me is Dr. David Greenfield. He's the founder and director of the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction, located in West Hartford, Connecticut. He's a psychologist treating patients worldwide for technology addiction. Dr. Greenfield, really great to have you. This is an issue of particular interest to people in my age group, so I think that might be useful first to just start out with, how are we defining technology addiction?
Well, you know, there are two real components in what I call Generation D, which would be anyone in 25 to 30 and under. And these are people that have grown up with digital and internet technology. And addiction really means that you have to meet some pretty serious medical criteria. There has to be some degree of withdrawal when you're not using it, some degree of tolerance, meaning that you're using it more and more, and that there has to be, more importantly, some deleterious or really negative effect in your life that is causing harm, like to your relationships, legal, health, financial status, marriage, work, academic performance. If you don't have one of those, or that combination, then you're probably not addicted. And only a small percentage, based on my research and my work, and I'm saying somewhere in the 4 to 6% range, would really meet that criteria. The rest of us are heavy users or abusers, and I think most of us are guilty of that.
Okay, so then let's figure out a little bit more about that. So some people who we said we were going to be doing this interview with you, they wrote in and they said, listen, my behavior is that at work, as part of my job, I'm on my computer and I'm on my mobile phone and I'm on email basically throughout the day. When I'm not at work, I'm kind of expected to not be too far out of reach. And when I go to a movie for 2 hours and I have to shut my phone off, I'm definitely wondering and thinking, do I have email?
Yeah.
Is there something there? There may not be a very specific negative effect that's associated, but they say, I definitely feel what I guess you would qualify as withdrawal. What does that sound like to you?
That sounds like somebody that I would classify as a heavy user or an abuser, and it's somebody who their technology has reinforced them to classically associate the phone with expected hits of dopamine from positive messages and texts and tweets. So, in other words, our phones, especially our smartphones, because we carry them with us everywhere we go, in a sense, are giant slot machines. Or not giant slot machines, they're small slot machines. So, what they're doing is they're doling out these positive reinforcements in the form of communications or information that we find pleasurable. Sometimes they're a text or an email that is something positive. When that happens, the brain secretes some dopamine, which is a pleasure neurotransmitter, which is the same neurotransmitter that's secreted when you do drugs or alcohol or have sex or do other pleasurable activities. What happens is the beeps and buzzes and things that the phone does to let us know that there's a message become conditioned with the expectation that there may be something there for us to look at. So it's sort of like akin to knowing that there's a Christmas package under the tree that hasn't been opened yet, and you just can't wait to open it. The problem with that is that it is habit forming, and then the technology in some sense is controlling you instead of you controlling it. It no longer is a tool. You're the tool for it as opposed to it being a tool for you.
There are some discussions about so-called addictive personalities, or personalities that biologically tend more to become addicted to whatever. It could be drugs, it could be gambling, it could be exercise, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Do you find, number one, that's, if you consider that line of thinking valid, does technology addiction fall under that same umbrella where there are certain people who just by their very nature are more likely to become addicted to technology?
Well, the answer is yes and no. There really is no such thing as a biological or psychological predisposed person for addiction. Now, that being said, there are certainly people who come from families where there are lots of addictions that have a higher likelihood of becoming addicted, but that's probably because of being exposed environmentally to that to addictive behavior growing up. As far as technology goes, it's a little more complicated because Generation D, this group of people, 25, 30 and under, have a different relationship with technology than anyone else. They treat technology like my generation would treat a toaster. It is embedded in their culture, in their social life, in the way they socialize, in their daily living. The phone is not really a communication device. It's part of their accessories of their clothing. It's integrated into their lives in such a way that it would be very hard for them to live without. So to answer your question, I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
Well, so I think we follow that there's a different framework maybe for people of a certain age that wouldn't necessarily fall under this paradigm.
Yeah, this is a group that, like, for instance, I see people, I get calls and emails literally from all over the country and elsewhere in the world. And, we've got 16 or 17-year-old kids that are gaming too much, or they're looking at porn too much, or whatever. That's different than an issue of somebody who is overusing their phone a little too much to check Facebook all day long. It's like, for instance, Facebook is not something that I tell the parents to get their kids off of, because Facebook is where kids hang out. They hang out virtually. They hang out in cyberspace. That's their social network. And also, texting and tweeting and the technologies of digital communication are really this generation's differentiation point from previous generations. So it's like Generation D's language, loosely speaking, it's the way you guys connect and relate. So some of that is normative and some of it is integrated into the social structure of this generation. And for me to tell a parent, oh no, the kid should never be on Facebook, would be like me saying, well, the kid should never go out and hang out with his friends. On the other hand, if he's spending 8 or 10 hours a day on Facebook, and not doing schoolwork, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, and then that even goes beyond the specific issue of technology addiction, because we know a lot of the negative effects of kind of living your life through your Facebook friends' status updates, and it shows
Right.
less satisfaction with your own life and the idea that everyone else is doing more and better things than you. I'm curious, what's your personal kind of technology usage?
Well, I'm talking to you on an HD camera through Skype with my smartphone next to me with a
No, but I
huge,
mean it more in terms of, frequency, and are you checking mail all the time on a mobile phone?
I think it's a fair question. I mean, I got interested in, as a doctor, I'm an addictionologist, so my background as a doctor is in the area of addiction. So I was interested in this area to begin with, but I also have a background in technology and electronics. So back in the mid 90s, when the internet started to heat up, I actually noticed my spending an excessive amount of time online. And this is back when we had dial-up, which you probably don't even remember.
So you were spending a lot of time online, but you weren't really getting that much done because the internet was so slow.
Yeah, internet was so slow, and also I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing? And there was no content either. We're talking, we're talking about in its infancy.
Yeah.
So, but nevertheless, it was still very compelling, and that's really what got me curious about. There's something about the interface, the medium of the internet itself, whether you access it on a tablet or a smartphone or a laptop or a computer, that makes it very addictive. And there's certain qualities like disinhibition or dissociation. For instance, everybody loses track of time and space when they're on this technology. So that is what likens it to what I call a digital drug. It has the capacity to alter our mood and consciousness. And so to answer your question about me, yeah, I'm absolutely susceptible to it, and I have to manage it. And what I do is I force myself to leave my phone at home, or I'll force myself to leave it in the car if I'm going in to eat, or I'll force myself to push myself offline consciously. If you don't consciously do it, you'll carry that stuff with you everywhere you go, and you will become enslaved by it.
All right, we've been speaking with Dr. David Greenfield. He's the founder and director of the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction in West Hartford, Connecticut. Dr. Greenfield, thanks so much for joining us. Very interesting.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Yesterday, I told you the story out of Florida, where Florida police were luring cocaine buyers from all over the country and even South America and Canada, paying informants millions of dollars cumulatively, all to get people to come into their jurisdiction so they could then execute drug busts on buyers, not on sellers. We now have an even more absurd story out of Reason.com wrote this up. This is out of California. And Doug and Catherine Snodgrass are the parents of an autistic son. And the autistic son had trouble making friends in school, always had trouble making friends. And after his new school year started, he came home and he told his parents, I've got this friend, and it's great. He's a really good guy, and I think I have a friend. So it turns out that this friend was a police officer. He was like the school undercover resource type officer who was there and had decided to target their clearly autistic son to try to convince him to buy some marijuana. It was not something that the autistic boy ever planned to do. He was not a drug user. He was not a drug buyer. He was not selling drugs. And eventually, he did it. He actually went and he bought half a joint of weed from someone downtown, from a homeless guy hanging out in his downtown, and was subsequently arrested. Eventually, he was eventually expelled from school, and the family hired a private attorney, took the case to court, and was eventually found not guilty due to extenuating circumstances. The judge had him undergo informal probation and perform 20 hours of community service, and then mandated that he be reinstated into his school. The police should be suffering the consequences here, not the child. What type of police officer would not realize that this is an autistic child, which, according to the parents, he has very noticeable challenges with regular aspects of life every single day, and create a situation where he plants the idea of buying drugs in the boy's mind and then gets the kid arrested for going downtown and buying half a joint, a half-smoked joint from a homeless man. This is the epitome of the failure of the drug war.
Yeah, and this is so incredible. This shouldn't be happening with any kid. It doesn't matter if it's an autistic kid who clearly would be more susceptible to this type of influence from the police officer. But why would this be happening at all? I mean, since when are you setting people up to buy and then busting them? I mean, isn't it usually the people who are selling who you're going after? This just makes no sense.
Right, and we're talking about half a joint. And the other thing was buy it for me. It wasn't even buy it and use it. Buy it and give it to me because I'm your friend. It's absolutely pathetic. One more other quick drug story. Can you fly with legal marijuana? Airlines are allowed to sell their passengers alcohol during a flight, but passengers can't even bring legal medical marijuana in their luggage. And the TSA now has a situation where if you're flying, for example, between Colorado and Washington, two states that have legalized small amounts of marijuana, presumably you're not doing anything illegal, although federally it is still banned. And the TSA, surprising to many, is actually saying, in that particular circumstance, we're probably not going to bust you. You're probably not going to get in trouble for that, which is absolutely the right move. Now, in some states where marijuana has not been decriminalized, the DEA is often stationed at airports, and they'll sometimes seize and search luggage. The TSA will call them if they find marijuana in people's bags. But we're developing quite a situation where at different layers of law enforcement, there are different rules. Different states have different rules. What if you're flying between a medical marijuana state and Colorado, which has legalized small amounts? We're getting into a very complicated situation, but my prediction is that this is going to help the decriminalization movement, not hurt it.
Right, that's a good thing. States are not going to go back on this. These things never go backwards. So in order to make life easier for everyone, all of these other organizations are just going to have to accept it.
And for all of our criticisms of the TSA, I'm glad that rather than the TSA taking the federal angle and saying it is federally illegal and we will treat it as illegal no matter what the circumstances are, they are actually being more open-minded about this, which I think is the correct move. Send us your voicemail. 219-2DavidP is our voicemail number. Let's go to a voicemail, see what people have to say.
Yeah, how you doing, David? Yesterday you were talking about the corporate billionaire media refusing to give us the facts. The reason they don't is facts have a liberal bias,
right,
and billionaires have a massive right-wing Republican bias. Fox runs interference for the rest of the networks by making them look reasonable. Just watch any Sunday talk show, and you will see 80% of the content is pro-Republican.
Yeah, I don't know for sure that it's 80%, but certainly there are a lot of Republican guests on those Sunday talk shows, but it really goes beyond that. Even when you go beyond left-right bias, you've got to consider the kind of pro-corporate bias, which is really what I think the voicemail is getting at, and it's more about who owns corporate media, and that goes above and beyond Bill Salmon at Fox News saying, use the GOP talking points when we discuss Obamacare. It goes beyond that. It goes to a corporate bias, corporations that don't want to lose access to important elected officials. The bonus show today, the new wave of pyramid schemes, a new viral marketing campaign. Where does electronic waste go? A lot of great stories from our members. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Support this program. We do appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.